Hi, Ecclesiastes lesson 5. We've talked through the one who created us, the one who began life, and every day begins with a sunrise. Now, you might not be able to see it, but it's there. And every day ends with a sunset. It could be brilliant, it could be downpouring rain, but the fact exists that the sun will set. So that's the time and seasons that are set in line by our Creator. So think about watches. Some of us still wear watches. Someone created them. There's an inner working of a watch, and they all rotate with small mechanisms, and they're interconnected with each other. And our computer systems, our phone, our iPads, our Fitbits, they've been replaced, but they still do the same thing. They're very intentional, very intercomplicated, and if you spill water on it, you got a problem. So we have seen the seasons described. We've dealt with the bookends of life, and we've talked about things that we really don't have any control over. We like to control things. Birth and death is not within our grasp at all. And then we talked about a time to plant and a time to uproot. And that's mostly out of our control. Now, we can select the seeds and we can plant them, but how they grow and mature, we can't control it. We can try to manage situations by water and protecting and weeding the area, but God created the seed to do its own thing. So to grow and to mature, much of our physical bodies too, it happens and we just watch it. The next thing we talked about was killing and healing, and we don't really have a lot of control over that. Try healing a broken leg in a hurry. Didn't work for me and it won't work for you. We want to rush life and we want to slow death. But there's a time for everything that God's put. So war doesn't really let us choose who dies, and sometimes the medical community, they can't heal. It's out of their hands. And then we talked about tearing down and building up. Things decay. The elements of our world hasten the process of falling, and we do our best, but when we want to build things, there are parameters we have to build on. So the next things that God talks about in Ecclesiastes is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. So we were at a wedding last weekend, and it was a lot of fun, dancing and all. See, I grew up in a background where you didn't dance. The reasons were very vague and misconstrued to the eyes of a teenager. But as a married woman, dancing with my husband at a wedding that honored God and honored marriage and honored those of us who had hung with it, dancing was not only a lot of fun, but it was very precious. At the same time, there was sorrow in the hearts that were dancing. You see, the bride's father was airlifted to the hospital the night of the rehearsal with serious heart condition. That brought the mourning and dancing into a whole new light. Instead of a father-daughter dance, her mom and her had a neat moment in the middle of the dance floor, and we prayed for the father's healing. But they said the wedding will go on, and yes, we will dance. You see, you really can't have one without the other. For the emotions that we approach life with, laughing, will eventually turn to weeping. And even with dancing, there is going to come a time where we are going to mourn. It's guaranteed. There will be both, and they both have merit. And for us at that wedding that night, it was all at the same time, all four. Let's go back and look at the verse again. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Another version says, a time to weep, a time to laugh. He sets the time for sorrow and a time for joy, a time for mourning and a time for dancing. He sets the time. And another one also phrases it, he sets a time for sorrow and joy, a time for mourning, a time for dancing. Basically, they all say the same thing because you can't reword it too many times. We have entered a path that is all about thinking and feeling. It's the choosing part of the social seasons that the inner relationships of life form. You have a relationship with someone, you're going to go probably through all four of those. You can, however, go through life and not care about people. You can go through life and not laugh. You can choose to harden your heart and not let the emotions come to the surface. You don't have to weep. If you don't love anyone and you don't care the rest of the world exists, you may not mourn. And if you live in a straight-laced box, dancing's out of the question. To me, that's kind of like eating cookie dough without any chocolate chips in it. We do that at our house. Or you make a cake. You leave it in the pan and you don't frost it. Or you get the Christmas tree out, plop it in the middle of the floor, don't put lights and decorations on it. You have the elements of Christmas, but to bring warmth and feeling, those lights and ornaments bring life to the tree and warmth to the hearts. So when we talk about a time to weep and a time to laugh, I'm not sure there's anybody that didn't go to Bible camp or Sunday school that couldn't memorize John 11:35. Jesus wept, shortest verse in the Bible. We know for a fact that Jesus was a man, he was human, and he had to deal with times in life where he cried. But I'm sure he also had times in life where he wanted to laugh. It's kind of like when you walk in the kitchen and one child has painted the other child with peanut butter. It's in their eyes, it's in their hair, and the model is standing as quiet can be while the artist is carefully creating a masterpiece. And every once in a while tells the model, quit licking the peanut butter off your lips. Those are moments, and we've all had them, when you just turn around to compose yourself, or you leave the room, and then you go get a camera. You can't help but howl on the inside, but you got to keep a straight face on the outside. I'm really sure Jesus had those moments because he was human. So we do know he wept at least once, but he wept inside lots of times when he would look at the people and look at the sorrow they were causing and look how they weren't living their lives the way that he knew they could live. But our sorrow and our grieving, we need to remember, turns the throne of God. Not just our pity and not our little fits we throw because we're mad at life. Our mourning moves God. It moved Jesus in John 11 when Jesus saw Mary weeping and the Jews who had come along with her were also weeping. He was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. And Jesus wept. Now, I get quite frustrated when someone is moved, brokenhearted, crying, and another person comes alongside them and says, well, you don't have to cry about it. Yeah, we do. And if God tells us there's a time to weep, then let us weep. Let us drown the Kleenex and let our nose run. Let us get red eyes and lay in our bed face down. You see, weeping has a time. If you don't love, you don't care. If you don't care, you don't cry. It's okay to cry. I'm not crazy about funerals, but the one thing I love about them is that people aren't afraid to be real. We see who we are. Even during sorrow, there can be joy, and during joy, tears can come. They can be happy tears. Tears are a great mirror. When I see tears in the eyes of a friend, it reminds me that they love me, and what hurts me hurts them. I remember when my mother passed, it was kind of nuts. We had people come from all places. Our house was full from one end to the other, people sleeping in the couches and the beds everywhere. And I actually ended up sleeping in the lounge by the horse arena, so I'd have a place to sleep. Your life runs on adrenaline, and though she'd been very ill and dying for quite a few months, we were ready, but we weren't prepared. So lots of people came and lots of people shared their stories. But when I lost it, and that's our term for crying, letting the tears come, is when I looked at the back of the church and I saw my friends walk in. Lots of people walked in, but those people shared my heart. There is something, a part of sharing tears, that comes with loving people. And I think that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes was really trying to tell us. There's a time for things to happen in life. Don't miss them, and don't wish them to go away. Don't waste your weeping, and don't miss laughing. Take a time to mourn, but also take time to dance. Now, Jesus went to a wedding, and it says in John 2 that there was a wedding and Jesus' mother was there. Now, admit it. There are times we do things because our mother wants us to do it. I used to get phone calls from mother telling me about something was happening. It was a very subtle hint that I should go. My grandma used to do that also. She would call and tell me about some anniversary of some second removed, fourth generation from wherever I am cousin. And then I would wait till she was done talking and say, Grandma, do you want me to drive you? There's something about a party or a celebration that we want our friends there, family there. We want our kids there. So Mary was there and Jesus showed up. It could be that he just showed up for the food. I had an uncle who went to funerals to get a good meal. In a small town, nobody even questions it. But think about it. Jesus chose a celebration, a time of laughter and dancing, to turn water to wine. Jesus must have loved people to step in and make the time of festivity and laughter better. And what was it? Something so simple as the wine was gone. Well, now that's embarrassing to a hostess, to be low on food or run out of wine. Our wedding, they ran out of food, and one of our friends had to run to Erdman's. Now, I didn't have a clue, but I did hear about it later. When one is laughing and enjoying life and dancing, we can make the party better. We continue the joy by loving on people. And that's what Jesus did. He made it better. Jesus also stepped in and stopped the mourning. He just raised people from the dead or healed people. Our hands are kind of tied. But we can step in and be a part of the mourning. Now, I know there are people who downplay the extremes of the emotions of life. They don't laugh and they don't cry. They don't mourn and they wouldn't be caught dead dancing. Jesus gives us some examples of just being with people and embracing where that is. So let's look at some Bible verses. Matthew 5:4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I guess the question is, do you know how to comfort? Do you know how to mourn? Or maybe what comforts you and what moves your heart when you mourn? So when we know how to walk, we teach others how to walk. When we know something, we can teach other people something. But there's times we walk alongside others and we go, I don't have a clue, but I love you. There is a blessing tied to mourning, and God promises comfort. So sometimes that comfort He gives needs to come from you and me. Weeping is a lot like mourning, and often we weep when we mourn. But what is the difference between crying and weeping? Well, the dictionaries have lots of different definitions, so hang with me. So weeping is formal, more serious, and crying is a process of which we weep. Another definition told me that weeping is silent and crying is loud. Another said crying is a generic, definitely genetic for some people, a generic shedding of tears, and weeping is more poetic, an expression of grief or sadness. And then Webster says that crying is to shed tears noisily. My kids have that down good. Whichever definition that we use, something happens that touches a part of our emotions. It touches us, and we cry. Now, I know people who cry over happy things. I know people who laugh over things the rest of us are sobbing over. It's how we react to what happens to us. And God says there will be times when you respond to life. You might cry, you might laugh, you might weep, you might dance. Isaiah 61:2-3 reminds us that there will be a time when we will be comforted. We will have joy. We will wear a garment of praise. Psalm tells us, 30:11, you turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. God promises that one season of our life is not going to last forever. When we are mourning, we need to be reminded that we will be glad and joyful again. When we are dancing in the streets and we can't feel any more elated, we need to know that there's going to come a time where our hearts are low and our tears are falling. We celebrate and we dance and we laugh over things that are special to us. And we have a good example of that in Exodus, where Miriam and the women danced and sang out of relief of being rescued when God led the children of Israel through the Red Sea. You know, we do that. Maybe we don't write songs about it. But when we're relieved, our whole demeanor changes. The stress lifted, it's like a backpack off our shoulders, and we step lighter. And Psalm reminds us in Psalm 149:2 that the people of Zion will be glad in their king. Let them praise his name with dancing and make music to him with timbrel and harp. Now, we don't celebrate God as much as we celebrate stuff. Now, I watch people throw some pretty cool birthday parties. It's off the wall cool, and some of them are literally just off the wall. But do we celebrate God with laughing and dancing? We laugh over jokes, but do we laugh over how God has brought us through things in our lives? What is our response to things in life, and how does that differ from what God has done for us? So there is a time and a season under heaven. It's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Just be sure that you make time for all of them. You make time to go shopping for groceries so you can eat. Make time to laugh over what God has done and how much He loves you. We take time to celebrate things in life with dancing. So dance before God. David danced before the ark. He chose to take that moment to be all in with joy and dancing. Now, I do live in the Scandinavian Midwest, okay? And other than a polka party, you're not going to see a lot of dancing or other expressions of emotion of any kind. Well, how can I change that? How can I show my love for God and the response in my heart for what He did with me, for me, to my life, how he changed me, how can I respond with laughter and dancing? And then again, how can I allow myself to mourn and weep and not be consumed by grief or not avoid others when I see them struggling through theirs? So there is a time and a season for every purpose under heaven. Take the time to dance. Well, don't step on toes or forget it's a waltz. There is nothing worse than watching someone dance that, well, can't dance. But then again, maybe that's where we err. The joyful expression of our hearts don't need a meter, a beat, so to speak. How can we just be filled and consumed with God that it doesn't matter who sees us, what beat we're on, or how many Kleenex we shove up our sleeve? So allow God to free you to be the emotional being he created in you in a beautiful and blessed way. Have a good one. Some discussion questions. So, when do you first remember crying as a child? And I know for some of us that goes back a long, long time. Crying. I guess I don't know as if I remember the first time I cried. It was probably brought on by my siblings, to be honest. I don't remember how my parents responded to my crying. And I think about my own kids, and when something would happen to them and they would cry, or they were punished and they would cry, it was kind of bothering to me, because those children are the ones that I want to protect. And I want to make sure that they have the things in life they need, not just stuff, but emotional things. And so when somebody would cry, there's a problem. I knew some people who put their child in bed at night and let them cry and picked them up in the morning, and I just couldn't do that, because to me crying meant something, and I wanted to make sure they felt like they were provided for, cared for, and loved. And yeah, they might have to fuss a bit, but the crying, there's something about crying, and maybe it's crying alone, because there were times, and I had one of my kids was a little colicky, nothing like some people. But I wasn't going to just lay him down. Sorry, now I put him under the bus. It was the him. But we just walked the floor and held him while he cried. Because there's something about crying and crying together that just kind of fills a different part of your heart. So I'm not sure when I remember crying as a child. Of course, obviously in our culture, we got spankings, and that was a different crying. I mean the crying that you're mourning or you're sorrowful or something's wrong that you can't fix. And as a parent, I wanted to respond to their crying and listen. And perhaps that's the one thing I love about God, is when I cry, he's a God that listens. He doesn't just put me in my crib, shut the door, and say, I'll see you in the morning. Discussion question 2. When has God moved you to weep? Okay, now there's a difference between crying and weeping. Crying is the response of something that's happening, and weeping comes from the soul. And I can kind of tell you the times that just really broke my heart was when I had done something wrong that I really realized was wrong. The repentant spirit of weeping. And then the times where we get the phone call and someone had passed. More so when it was a tragedy. But times where just wanted to cry. Just wanted to lay on the bed and just let everything that was troubling inside come out. And it normally comes out in tears. So when has God moved me to weep? And I think for me the biggest one was over understanding a sin and realizing what that did to God. And did it make a difference in my faith walk? Obviously. Did it make a difference in how I looked at people? Definitely. Because when God came along and moved me to weep over something I did wrong, I kind of saw where I was a disappointment to God. And not that God was telling me, oh, I'm such a disappointment to you, but I had failed God. And failing people is hard enough. But when you look at the fact that I have failed God, that is what has brought me to weep. And that has changed my faith walk in ways that now I understand what sorrow is, and sorrowful in sin, and some of the Old Testament characters and figures that we see when they were moved and when they wept, when they saw what their sin had done, just caused them to weep in a way that was deeper than anything they had seen before. And the third question, how does come alongside of someone who is emotional, who maybe just cries at everything, how does it change how we step in and love people? Well, you know, it really doesn't matter what people do all the time. Oh, she always cries, or she always gets upset. That's not what God asks us to do. It's not a matter of how many times or the personality of a person. There's a time and a season, and God says, I want you walking along people who are suffering and who are struggling, because I want God walking alongside me in those areas. I don't want God to say, oh my goodness, she's having another emotional day. I think I'll just go back out to the back 40 and ignore her. I want God to understand and reach out and be a part of my sorrow and my working through it. Therefore, I need to be willing to be a part of that time and season in someone else's life to walk it through with them. Does that change when we step in and love people? You've watched people come alongside people and just do it because it's the thing to do. But when we love people, when we really truly care what makes someone tick, it's not a burden. It's not like, good grief, I have to go now, she's crying again. No, it's because, I love this person and I want to walk them through what they're dealing with so then they can be more successful. They can feel God. They can rise above. Because we all find ourselves in those places. It's just a matter of when it's going to be our turn. Number 4, dancing. Do you? Do you dance? And what does dance do to your heart? And it's not just a good exercise. So I alluded to this in the video. We grew up where dancing was evil and sinful and horrible and all those other things. And I can see a part of that could be true. But there is something about dancing when you are full of joy that is an expression that cannot be duplicated anywhere else. I first saw it when I worked in some of the inner city churches in Hartford, Connecticut. These people didn't have much. And here I was, an 18-year-old kid coming from Minnesota to inner city Hartford, Connecticut. And there was a joy I hadn't seen. And then they started dancing. And it's like, you're going to dance in church? Well, first of all, you can't dance. So, of course, right away I'm going, ooh. But the joy that was inside came out. Now, I grew up in Scandinavian, Norwegian, Minnesota, where if there was joy inside, you didn't know about it. The most exciting, joyful my great-grandmother got was giving us frozen Hershey candy bars from the freezer. That was her expression of joy. I didn't see my grandparents exhibit joy. Didn't see my parents necessarily exhibit joy. But there's something in our hearts that if we can't keep it in, it's going to come out. And dancing is an expression of that. And I don't mean the tango and the chicken dance and all those other. I mean just letting ourselves express. Now, if you watch people that are truly full of joy, they can't keep their hands down. They're embracing God. Their lives are open. And though they may not be doing the two-step, they are dancing with joy to God. Number 5, mourning isn't always about a death or loss. What do we mourn about that's healthy? And what do we mourn about that's not healthy? So I think a lot of times this last year with COVID, we have mourned the loss of relationships. We've mourned the loss of hugging people. And I did it again the other day. I just hugged 2 people. I'm not going to worry too much about that. But that is something I have really missed. And I'm, in some ways people would say I'm not touchy-feely, but I really, really am. It's just certain places, certain times, certain circumstances. So we mourn over things sometimes that we've lost opportunities. We lose a job, we lose a relationship, we lose a moment in time. That father that was in the hospital in Rapid City, he can't go back in time and go to his daughter's wedding. There was a mourning there that my dad can't walk me down the aisle. But the concern over his life was more than the moment at hand. So definitely there are things that we mourn over that are life and we can't take them back. Then there's things we mourn over that is really petty. So I am mourning over the loss of, okay, let's just be honest. The dog peed in my carpet. My new carpet, my new rug, and the dog peed on it. Okay, not once, but twice. And it's not even my dog, it's my grand dog. So in a really weird way, I kind of am mourning the fact that my carpets aren't pristine anymore. Now, it's really not important to me, but it's interesting how things come out that you don't think are important that, oh, it maybe is important. I'm also mourning the fact, and this is really petty, we don't have enough snow to go snowmobiling. And winter is a time when we enjoy winter sports. We're out snowmobiling. We don't have enough snow to really make it good. So I'm showing you how petty I am. But that is, we mourn over things. Sometimes what we mourn over is natural and a good progression. I lose my job. I mourn over it. I walk through the door. I start looking for a new job. God gives me a different presentation that is better than the one I had before. But we still need to go through a mourning process. And when people are very ill, hospice, we're mourning. We're mourning that process long before the incident happens. And we move on. That's healthy ways of going through life. Unhealthy ways of mourning is to hang on to the situation longer than it needs to be. We all know people who've done that. They just cling to something and that's all they talk about, that's all they think about. It possesses them. That's a mourning that is not necessarily healthy. 6, is there a time when we watch the seasons slowly leave us and we mourn and weep over what we have lost? And I'm sure that both the bride and her father had some moments of that, and the mother and the whole family. There was no family picture at the wedding. Dad wasn't there. That was a season of time that they can't get back, and you do need to mourn that. But when we're watching a season move away from us, I think a lot of times people, when they get married, the parents, the mothers, because mothers feel that way, we mourn the fact that we don't have this child anymore that's ours. Now they're married and they have a new life. And as much as it's exciting, it's a bit of a mourning because things are changing. And I think sometimes I mourn change more than anticipate change. Because we really get comfortable in what we're doing. We really get comfortable in our rut. And to get out of our rut, you got to jump a little bit. And it's just uncomfortable and it's odd, and we really like our rut. So sometimes we watch the seasons leaving us and we mourn that and spend too much time being sad over what is going. It's not going to work anymore. And instead of anticipating what God's moving us to. And then the last question, what is God asking you to change in your approach to weeping, mourning, laughing, or dancing? So, as with anything, if it doesn't apply to something we can actually learn from and take into our everyday lives, it's kind of useless. So, what am I going to change in my approach to weeping, mourning, laughing, or dancing? And I'll just break down each one. Never waste your tears. And I heard somebody talking about this, and it was someone who lost a job, and I think it was a pastor. And it was not a good situation, which unfortunately a lot of church issues end up in not good separation. And the one person what was giving him advice says, don't waste your mourning time. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And he says, learn from it. Spend this time learning and let God teach you, because soon you will be out of that season. So don't waste whatever season you're in. If it's a weeping season, let God teach you about yourself. Learn where because we all have trigger points. Learn where your trigger point is so that people don't look at you and go, oh my goodness, there she is crying again. And I don't mean shut it off and turn it on, but I do mean shut it off and turn it on. I mean, be wise in taking your time to do whatever it is. There's nothing worse. Well, there could be something worse. But if you've ever had a toddler who turns the radio on or the tape deck on and they dance, okay, tape deck, that's dating me. And they dance and they dance and they dance. And finally you say, you've got to quit dancing. There's something about people that don't understand limits. And I think God wants me to understand appropriate limits. There's a time to weep. And there's a time to dance. And there's a time to mourn. There's times for all these things. Laugh. But there's nothing worse than sitting in a place where you're supposed to be serious and the person beside you get the giggles and you can't help but laugh. And then once you start laughing, you can't quit. I have had to excuse myself from church services because that's kind of where it happens for me, because I can't quit giggling. It wasn't the time to laugh, but it was funny. So I need to just remind myself that God gave me a time to do those 4 things. Make sure I take the time to be in the moment when it's there. But don't hold on too long or know when it becomes inappropriate. And my father told the story about a girl who didn't get a joke. They would tell jokes before school started. And of course, this is back in the 30s. And they told jokes before school started. No big deal. And about 3 periods into their class, the day, this lady started laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. She had just got the joke. But the time she chose to laugh about the joke was when she got it, and it wasn't the right time. And I think we need to see where God is leading us. That there's a time He's given us to handle those emotions. Make sure we don't hold on too long. Make sure we give them the proper honor that they deserve, because every single one does have honor. And God has appointed them as legitimate emotions. But don't hang on to them so long that they become a noose around your neck or a bothersome to other people, and our witness for Jesus is challenged. So I hope the discussion questions have made you think a little bit deeper about the 4 parts of our emotions that we will deal with on an everyday, if not every hour, situation in our lives. Have a great one.